Hello and welcome to the Still Standing series. I'm your host, Coach Violet Coots, and I'm happy to have with me my special guest today, Jennifer Shook. I'm a Christian life coach. I'm helping individuals cultivate an intimate relationship with God, equipping and empowering them to walk in the freedom and purpose God has designed them. I'd love for you to grab my free biblical affirmation card so that you can start renewing your mind today. And if you're feeling stuck in your relationship with God, schedule a free breakthrough session with me. I'll have that link in the show descriptions. Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Hi, Violet. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. And I know today we're going to be talking, you're going to share your journey, your story, and it's going to be something that's going to resonate with, I'm sure, a lot of people.
Mm.
And so I'm not going to delay that. So I'm just going to invite you to tell us about you and then share your story.
Okay. My name's Jennifer Shook. I live in San Antonio, Texas. I'm married to Scotty, my husband. We've been married 18 years, together 24 years. And we have a daughter, Jordan, who's about to be 29 on Thursday. Oh my goodness.
Oh, wow.
Um, yes, and then I have a stepson also, Brandy, who is he's 38, and he's actually in federal prison right now, so that's part of our story too. So we have a lot of our story involves prison, and I'm going to share that. So just a little bit more about me. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Indiana, born in Illinois, grew up in Indiana, and I grew up in a Christian home. I was very loved. I knew I was loved. I felt very safe, very secure. I heard about Jesus from the moment I mean, every memory I have involves church, Jesus, hearing about God's love. It was just weaved into every part of my life and all of my family, really. My mom's parents, my dad's parents, everyone. It was just a Christian family.
Okay.
And so but what I would say about that is, even though I definitely knew that a relationship with Jesus was important, I did not understand the concept of grace. And I felt like it was all about following the rules.
Yes.
And it wasn't like anybody was just up there saying, follow the rules, but that's how I was receiving it. And that's how I heard it and believed it. And so I um I looked at God as if I was doing all the right things and being the good little church girl that I knew I should be, then he was happy with me. And if I didn't and I did something wrong, then I felt like he was mad at me. And so like I grew up going to the altar over and over and like, okay, let me just like ask for forgiveness and give my life to Jesus one more time just in case it didn't take last week. And
Right.
so there was so much fear that I just wasn't going to make it to heaven, really. Like that was my fear. Like, I'm just not going to make it to heaven. I don't know if I'm being good enough.
Right.
And so as I grew up in that, I didn't realize it at the time, of course, but I was very much performance driven and doing things and feeling like I had to do in order to be loved. And so I also, growing up, struggled with identity and self-image. And, I was a chubby kid and turned into a chubby teenager. And then just you want to be told that you're beautiful by boys at that age, right? And
Right.
then and you want to be loved and accepted. And so I craved that. And when I was 18 and I go off to college, I go to this small little private Baptist university in Texas. Oh, by the way, I did move from Indiana to Texas when I was 16. That was I was not happy about it at the time because my whole life was in the Midwest. I knew nothing other than just where I was from. And so before I moved here and before I got here, I just pictured everybody in cowboy hats and riding a horse. And like I literally had no idea what Texas was like. And so
Gotcha.
I got here when I was 16 and
And that's
Um,
a hard age to move.
oh yeah.
You're
Oh
right.
yeah. It
Yeah.
was, I was not happy with my parents, but it ended up, I would never want to go back and change it. I love it here. It just was it was the perfect thing that my family needed. And so I can say that now, even though
Right.
in the moment I did not like it. So I lost a bunch of weight in high school. And then I go off to college and getting all the attention from boys and just like eating it up and, not knowing what to do with that. Well, I get pregnant when I'm 19 years old. And that totally messes up my viewpoint of, well, if I do all the right things, God's going to be happy with me. And if I don't follow all the rules, God's going to be mad. So I just thought God was mad at me. I thought that I've ruined everything. I've messed up. I didn't follow the rules. Um, and it was a really difficult time. And then my daughter's father was not going to be in her life. And so um I was walking into this completely alone. I mean, with my family, of course, but just, going to be a single mom, feeling so much guilt and shame.
Yeah.
I was a very driven person. I had a lot of goals for my life. And so in during that season and time, it was kind of like, okay, now what? What am I going to do? What am I, my whole life has changed. So for about the first 5 years of her life, um, I was very angry and dealt with a lot of anger, which really was anger at myself. Um, I had gained all that weight back I had lost and then plus some. And so I just felt so awful. I just felt like, because I still had that belief that I had to look perfect to be loved, I had to be perfect to be loved. And so I was just setting myself up for failure all around.
And all that pressure. I mean, all that pressure.
Oh my gosh, so much pressure on myself, of course,
Yeah.
So
Yes. Yeah. That's what yeah. Pressure on yourself and stuff. Yes. That's what I meant.
yeah.
And I can imagine, well, I can to some degree because everything that you're talking about is, I say legalism and stuff, but the rule things, because I grew up as well and did not understand
Yeah.
grace and the rules. And I had that same perspective. It was like, so as you're talking and as you're, giving that, I'm like, oh, I can so relate because I went through so much of that myself, and you've got all that internal things going on
Oh
uh,
yeah.
with that. So
Yes, absolutely. And I was a great listener and I wanted to hear all about your problems, but I didn't want to talk about my problems. And so I just held everything in and just it wasn't good, right? And that's where I think so much of that anger came from. And then when my daughter Jordan, she was 5, I went to a retreat with my church, my singles group at church, and it was, I don't even really fully remember what was said. I remember that the preacher was talking about Peter and when Jesus was restoring Peter back to himself and asking him if he loved him, and um, that whatever it was about that sermon just hit me and I was able to really release so much of the guilt and shame and let it go. I remember getting rebaptized in the river that weekend. I had been baptized when I was 11, but I got baptized again. And it felt like very much like a fresh start. And
wow.
that, wow, okay, God, you do have a purpose for my life. You do have a plan. I haven't ruined everything, And so that was really the beginning of me kind of walking a different way with Jesus. And then he led me to a Bible study called Search for Significance that really changed my life at the time. It was all about identifying lies in your life and replacing them with the truth. And I had never heard that my whole life growing up in church. I didn't know I could believe a lie about which now it sounds crazy thinking about it, but yeah, I did not understand that concept. And so God started to point out to me lies I was believing about him, about myself, about other people. And it really just became so transforming during that time. And that's when I met my husband. And so a few months after I got rebaptized in that river, and just surrendered everything to him, God brought me my husband, Scotty. And at the time, he was serving time in a prison here in Texas. And a friend of mine a friend of mine is the one who introduced me to him, and that's a whole nother story that I won't get into. But um, I really didn't think I would ever go meet him. I felt like, okay, well, I'll write him and he can write me, but I don't ever plan to go visit him. It'll be my ministry, you
Gotcha.
know? And so, um, but this was November of 2000, we started to write. And I just, when you're writing someone and I didn't really have any fear of like, well, I mean, he's never going to see me. So I can just tell him everything I want to tell him, just tell him my
Right.
whole story. And so we began this just writing each other letters, and he would write me, and he would always tell me in his letters, like, I'm going to give you just a little bit at a time because I don't want to scare you away. And so, because his story is, it has a lot of trauma. Um, anyway, obviously I did go meet him a few months later, and we started this relationship in prison, and never in a million years thought that that would be my life. No one ever really sets out and says, "Oh, I want to go find my husband in a prison," right? That's
Right.
just not what you say. Um,
Right.
and so, anyway, we began this journey together. He had gotten saved right around the time that we were writing. And so, just getting to be a part of his journey and walking through that with him. And I mean, it was a radical transformation. He had been a heroin addict for 17 years. He
Wow.
had known, I mean, his whole life had been full of abuse. Pretty much had been on his own, raising himself since he was 14, working, and just, I could not even comprehend what kind of life that was. Like, my life was so opposite of that.
Right.
And here God was bringing the two of us together. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. This is a crazy story. Right. Um, so
Now
when
I
he,
have to ask a question,
yeah, yeah,
if I may.
please
And
ask.
because I'm sitting here thinking of all the mamas. I'm sitting
Yeah,
here thinking as a mama.
yeah, ask that question.
And it's like, now what did your parents say? What, not just your parents. And of course, this has been even a few years ago, but what did people was like, wait a minute, you're
Right.
having a conversation with some man in prison. I
I know.
mean, I'm sure you got it.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like, okay, so yeah, I told my parents from the beginning that I was writing him even before I went to go visit him, and they weren't surprised. I was kind of that, their kid that was just a risk taker and out there and like gonna do her thing, and so they're like, okay, Jen's going to, she's gonna write some dude in prison. Um, but they didn't think probably that it was going to go anywhere. So when I did start to go visit him, and then they're thinking of my daughter, because my daughter's 5 years old at this time, and I'm raising her, and they're wondering, okay, what's going to happen? And I just shared with them, I like, I would love for y'all to be a part of this. We know that God has brought us together. We believe that. We trust that. Um, and we would love for you to join in on the journey. And so my mom actually decided to jump in right away, and she decided to write him. She was like, okay, I'm going to get to know who this guy is, if you're going to be, in his life, if he's going to be in our life. And so she did, and she actually went to go visit him with me, and fell in love with him. Like, she loved him, and he had that way about him. Like, when you would go visit him in prison, you would actually walk away more encouraged than, you thinking we're going to
Right.
go there and encourage him. And he encourages us more because he was so on fire for the Lord, and he had such a radical transformation. It was just like this, it was like a new life for
Right.
him. And he just shared it with everybody, And um, so it took my dad about a year, which, I can understand that. He
Right.
was not for it. He was not happy about it. But my mom played a huge role in that. And God just gave both of them so much peace.
Good.
And my mom definitely influenced my dad's decision. And so about a year later, my dad went with me to go visit him for the first time. And at that time, he wasn't very far. He was about an hour and a half from where we lived. And and that was the most nerve-wracking visit ever of my whole life. Like, okay, what's this going to be like? And so I remember Scotty telling me I had gotten up to go get him some snacks, and my dad and him were there alone. And then later when I saw him by myself, he told me that my dad had asked him, okay, I'm concerned about this, like, what are your intentions? And Scotty told him, of course you're concerned. It would be weird if you weren't concerned. Like, this
Right.
is not a normal situation, right? And I've even thought about that myself. If my daughter came to me now and told me what I told my parents, what would I say and what would I do? Like, it
Right.
would have to be a God thing. God would have to give me peace like he did my parents for me to be okay with it, right?
Right.
So in the beginning when I met him, all I knew was he was up for parole in about 18 months. I knew nothing about prison. I knew nothing about Texas prison system. And boy, did I learn a lot over the next several years. That journey turned into an 8.5 year journey of him being in prison and
Wow.
us. Yes. Yes. And I think God knew better than to tell me that at the beginning because I'm not so sure I would have jumped in. But
Wow.
I went through 6 parole denials with him. He would be up for parole every year, and we'd get our hopes up. Okay, God, you've given us promises. We know you're going to bring him home. I know you didn't bring him into my life to just leave us like this, God. I know you're going to do something. And then the parole would be denied, and we'd wait again. But during that time, both of us were on a faith journey. I learned so much about faith, really, and about God's perfect timing. And
Yes.
during that time, I was changing. I was on that journey of identity, learning my identity in Christ and growing. And I started sharing that or leading that Bible study that I had gone through, Search for Significance. I started leading it at my church and taking other women through it. And at the time I was a teacher, I took a group of my teacher friends through it at school. It just became my passion, and that's how I am. It's like once I grab a hold of something and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It's like I have to share it with everybody. And then I get frustrated when they don't get it really quickly. And
Yeah.
God has to remind me, it took you a while to figure this out. So like
Right.
let's like be patient with people and love them where they're at, right?
Right.
So he came home from prison on May 4th, 2009. So during this time, my daughter was 5 when I met him, and she was 14 when he came home. And the amazing thing about God is that before I even met Scotty, I had prayed and I said, God, whoever my husband's going to be, he has to love my daughter as if he's his own. She's his own because her father's not in her life. So
Yeah.
whoever that man is, God, you have to give him a love for her. And I will never forget, I was sitting at a visit with him, and he had shared his story, parts of his story with me at this time, and he never knew his biological father.
Mm.
So he could completely understand what that felt like. And we were sitting at a visit one day, and I had sent him a little picture of her. This was before he met her in person. And I had sent him her picture, and he told me that he had been looking at her picture and that he said these exact words. God has given me this immense love for this child. And every time I look at her picture, I just want to be your daddy. I love her so much. And I'm like
Oh,
bawling at the visit. And I'm like, God, my
right.
exact words that I prayed is exactly what he said.
Oh, wow. That
So
just gives me chills.
I know it gives me chills too right now thinking about it because
Yeah.
God cares about the details,
Yes.
every little detail. And so but when he came home, it was a process for her because the only men in my daughter's life were my dad and my brother. That, I mean, there were men at church and things, but like as far as really speaking into her life, those
Right.
2 men. And she had Scotty in her life all those years, but it was a long distance relationship, and she'd go visit him and she'd write letters. At that time, there were no phones in the prison system, and so we never really talked to him on the phone.
Gotcha.
So it was a transition for sure, just her getting used to him being around. But I've been asked by people, like, was I scared? Was I nervous for him coming home? Just never living together, like never even really spending time outside of a prison visiting room. Um, and I can honestly say I was not nervous. We were both so excited to just live life together out here and to get get moving with like whatever God wanted to do, you know?
Right.
So while he was in prison in 2006, we actually did get married on paper. My dad actually signed the marriage certificate because my dad was a pastor at the time. I didn't grow up with him being a pastor. He was a businessman, but he ended up going into ministry later in life. And so that was just a miracle of God. My dad and mom would go and visit him during those 8.5 years, and they built their own relationship with him. And my dad was on staff at our church at the time. And so when everybody at our church knew about Scotty, it was so amazing. It was like, because my dad had shared with, the other preachers and the staff. And so a lot of those people had written support letters for him in his parole package. And just so people that never had met him already loved him and were just waiting for him to come home to this church. I'm like, okay, God, only
Right.
you can put a story like this together, because this is crazy. Like, I would
Right.
never recommend it for anybody to go find your husband in prison, but like, it's
Right.
our story. It's how we met.
Right.
It's where it started,
And I'm just thinking, the word that keeps coming to my mind is just God's redemption, just
Yeah.
God's redemption, and and how he's just, I mean, there's so many stories within your story, and we haven't even got to the end of it.
I
But
know. I know.
but
I
it's
know.
just, I'm sitting here just thinking, wow. But yeah, just God stories. Just go ahead. But
Right?
redemption
Absolutely.
is what I keep thinking is just his
Oh yeah.
redemption.
So much redemption. And I during those 8.5 years too, I started building relationships with his family, and they all lived up in Fort Worth. And just, God was doing something. It was like I was the bridge between him and his family, because he had been so disconnected from his family for so long, because he had been a drug addict, and there was just, there was so much hurt, so much pain.
Right.
Um, but God was at work. And when he came home, we got married in 2006. He came home in 2009. We had a wedding. And that was one thing my parents said is, we will sign this marriage certificate, but you're going to have a wedding when he comes home. And I wanted a wedding. Of course I wanted a wedding,
Right.
So we had a beautiful wedding with our family and friends that July of 2009. And so, we just started living life. I was teaching, and he started out. I love this part of his story, because he's such a hard worker, and he was willing to do anything. And he had spent over 15 years in prison total. I was a part of that for 8.5 years, but he had been there over 15 years. He
Wow.
went in at 27, he came out at 43. And so just like trying to catch up, right? And figure
Right.
out life. And there were no cell phones when he went into prison. And so like, he was coming out at the time. Do you remember the Razor cell phones, like the little flip Razor phones? I
Yes.
had
Yes.
the hot pink Razor phone, and I loved it so much. And I had bought him a silver one. And so just watching him just try to figure it out was so amazing and funny and fun all at the same time. So the world had changed,
Yeah,
and the
that's fair
world
to
was
say.
fast paced, and he
Like
had to.
stepping into another world
Yeah.
altogether.
Yes. So his very first job he got, because he is a welder and he was in construction. He had built homes his whole life with his dad and his grandpa. And so, but he had learned how to weld in prison. And so he went to work at a scrap yard, making minimum, it was like $7.60 an hour at that time, but he took it, and he had a job within a week. And then he just started working his way up, and he started a little side business and started doing handyman work. And then that grew into our construction business, and just, so many things that where God was just helping him along the way, and helping us. And so we started living life. We were involved in our church. We had a life group that we were a part of. Our daughter was growing up. We were being parents to her, and we had friends and family, and just doing the normal things. And we started doing prison ministry together, which was so amazing for us. We even got to go back into the prison where I met him, where he got saved. We walked into that prison together. We shared our testimony, and he got to walk out, which was
Right.
amazing. And so there were just so many full circle moments for us. And just, he comes alive in a prison when he's sharing his story with those men. And so it was so powerful. And so that was our life. It was beautiful. I mean, yes, we had things like every couple has, the biggest thing being he did struggle with working a lot and just a work addiction and, trying to catch up. And in 2018 is when things shifted, and literally our life changed from one day to the next. And so I've kind of painted a picture of just how beautiful life was and how amazing he was, and just I trusted him with everything in me. If I never ever in a million years would have ever doubted anything he said. Um, I trusted him with everything, and I didn't know that he was struggling, and he was having this inward struggle, and just hiding it and avoiding it, and just not reaching out for help. And you know, um, he he had been at that time he had been sober for 17 years, when you're in prison, there is access to any drug, alcohol you could possibly imagine. So it's still a choice to be sober in prison. And when he got saved, God radically delivered him from heroin, all of it. He just no longer had the taste for it, didn't want it. It was just an immediate deliverance from it. And
Right.
so that was part of his story. And so, anyway, in 2018, he started drinking, and he thought he would be okay. And him and I even talked about it. We talked about it for 6 months, and I asked him questions like, "Do you think you're going to be okay? Do you feel like you'll still be sober? Do you consider this part of your sobriety?" Or because some in the recovery world, well, most people believe like you give up all of it. There's no alcohol, no drugs, no nothing, no matter what your drug of choice is. And one little part I forgot to mention was that he had actually also been a drug abuse counselor for 7.5 years. He helped so many people get sober and get set free from addiction during that from 2009 on. And so he started to drink thinking he'd be okay, and it just spiraled. And so in June of 2018, um, one night he went out, and it was not normal for him to go out. Like, he told me he was going to go on a ride on his motorcycle, his Harley, and I'm like, okay. I mean, it felt a little off, but he had done that before, just not late at night. Well, he didn't come home for several hours, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, there's something off. There's something off. And that he had been at a strip club, and I found out the next morning, and I'm like, so much shock. Like, if you would have ever told me that that would be something that he would do, no, there's no way in a million years he would ever allow himself to do something like that, or to even lose control with alcohol. And so I I went into when I first found out about just what was going on with him, and that he had been drinking more than he said, and that you know things kind of started to trickle out. He would give me little bits of things that he had been struggling with, going to strip clubs here and there. Um, and but I didn't have the whole picture. He was only giving me a little bit, and I didn't understand it. I'm like, why? How did we get here? Like, I had no clue how we got here. And basically, what it came down to was that when he got saved in prison, he was set free, and he was radically changed, and he forgave people that had hurt him. But the one thing that he thought was that all of the trauma, all of the pain, he just thought he was fine now. He thought, I'm good. But really, what he had done had just shoved it down, and it just pressed it down, and there was still so much hurt there that he hadn't dealt with, and he avoided it out here. He avoided all that pain and trauma. And then he also came out of prison just wanting to please me. He wanted me to be happy. And he would all the time, he would say, "Are you happy? Are you happy? I just want you to be happy." And I'm like, it was great in the beginning, because I'm thinking, oh, he just loves me and he just wants me to be happy. And I'm like, but no, really, it was pressure for him to make sure that I was happy. Well, nobody can be happy all the time, right? And so all of those things just started adding up to where he just got to a point where he couldn't take it anymore, and he just like dove straight into addiction again. And that's that June of 2018, we invited some friends of ours into this just to help us. They were close friends of ours. We went over to their house that day that I found all this out. We prayed. We asked for their help, and they are still a part of our lives. They're still in the journey with us. I definitely went into rescue mode. I wanted him to be fixed. I wanted him to be better. I would tell God, God, just give me my Scotty back. Like, this is not going to be our story. I would say that to God, like, no, this is not the story. No. It was so hard for me to accept that this was the story, that we were actually dealing with this now, because what had happened in our life was that we would hear, because we were very vocal about our story. People knew our story, knew how we met. We'd share our testimony in places, and people would always tell us how inspiring we are and how amazing we are, and everybody needs a Scotty and everybody needs a Jen. And with these were just normal things that we heard from people.
Right.
So when you're used to hearing that, and then this happens, and I'm like, okay, God, what do I say now? Because we're not so inspiring now. And look at our story now. There was, like, I had definitely made our story an idol, and I didn't even know it. I didn't even know it at the time. So I would say for the first 3 years, which is crazy to even say, I was so focused on him, and which was a pattern for me. It was rescuing other people, focusing on other people, making sure they're okay. But what God showed me was that I wanted Scotty to be fixed so bad, because I didn't like what it was drawing out in me. Because if he wasn't fixed, that all these things bubbling up in me, what was I going to do with that? Like, the control and the fear that was coming out of me. I'm like, no, I don't like that feeling. I don't like this. Like, we've got to make sure he's better, But what God was after in me was all of that stuff that I didn't want to go through. I didn't want to deal with what he was after in me, because it was scary. It
Right.
was painful, and as we progressed through this addiction, and we were getting help, we were seeing counselors, he was going to recovery groups. We were doing things, but it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And when was it? May? Yeah, May of 2021. Um, he went into a rehab for about 3 weeks, and it was supposed to be like a 60 to 90-day thing. He ended up coming out early. I had put all my hopes in this rehab, thinking, okay, God, this is it. He's
Right.
going to be better. We're going to get to start moving forward now. And actually start the healing process, because there was so much. When you're dealing with addiction, there's infidelity, there's just the fear of, what am I going to wake up to today, what am I going to be dealing with today. I was never an anxious person. I didn't live with anxiety. I just wasn't an issue for me until this, where I can't go to sleep at night now. I can't stay asleep. There were nights when he didn't come home, and I had no clue where he was. And I would, go to sleep praying, God, I know your angels are with him, protect him, bring him home safe, because I had no clue if he would be dead or alive the next day. I had no clue. It was to that point where, once he started down that road of addiction, it got bad.
Right.
And so when he went to rehab, and I thought, okay, this is it, we're going to finally get to start healing, he was out for about 3 weeks and relapsed again. And that's when I decided, okay, I have done it all, God. I have tried everything I know to try, and this is not the way. This is not working. I've tried to be really quiet and not say a lot to him and just let him do his thing. I've tried to be really vocal and come up with all the plans and tell him what to do, and that's not working. I was mad. I was, just so many emotions. And so I decided to go get help. I went to Al Anon, which is a 12-step group for families of alcoholics. And I remember sitting in that room. It was June 30th of 2021, and just listening to the stories of the women around me. And I'm like, okay, these people get it. They get it. And I felt so much peace just hearing their stories, and I felt so validated. And the crazy thing was, I had been so judgmental in the past of like 12-step groups. I really had. Like, my self-righteousness was definitely something that God was after in me. That religious spirit, the judgmental junk, just so much of that had to come out. And I kind of looked at 12 step in the past as like, well, I don't like the whole higher power thing and it needs to be about Jesus, and just so much judgment, But I met incredible people who do love Jesus in those groups,
Right.
and you find, when you find people that truly get it and truly understand what you're going through, and you feel seen and you feel heard, it just does something. It does
Yep.
something for you.
Yep.
And I desperately needed that at that time in my life. So, and one other thing I do want to add too is that right before Scotty's relapse, that June of 2018, God, I went to a 1-day retreat with a friend of mine, Cindy, the same friends that we ended up at that day praying with them after the relapse thing. Her and I went to this retreat, and I God knew what he was doing sending me to that retreat, because there was a bunch of women from different churches, different places, all different backgrounds, and we were coming to this place, this retreat, and it was called Inspired. And Lene, the woman who started these retreats, um, I she also was doing coaching. She was doing spiritual life coaching. And my friend Cindy had been meeting with her and telling me about it. And she was talking about this thing called freedom prayer and inner healing. And I'm like, okay, I had no grid for what she was talking about, but it
Right.
sounded cool. I'm like, that sounds really amazing. But it was also scary to think about going inside and like, what am I going to find in there?
Right.
I don't know. Well, I had decided at that retreat, I'm going to start meeting with Lene and doing coaching. And so a couple weeks after that retreat, I had my first session with her, had amazing breakthrough. And it was all about how I viewed God as my punisher. And we just broke through that. Like, God brought up a memory where that started. We broke agreement with lies. Jesus healed stuff. It was amazing. It was so amazing. And I know that that was not on accident, because 2 weeks later, when Scotty relapsed and all of that started, my whole world changed. I had already gone through this first session with her and dealt with a major lie in my life of God being my punisher. And I'm so thankful for that, because I don't know what I would have done during this journey with God. I probably would have been mad and angry and blaming him for everything, but really I wasn't. It was not, it was so different now after that first session with her. And
Yeah.
I met with her every month. I still meet with her 6 years later. I still meet with her.
Right.
There was probably a year in there where I didn't, but I started to go to her retreats and just meet these, continue to be around these amazing women. And I was learning, God was changing me, and he was teaching me how powerful my words are, the things that I say about myself and about others, and how there's life and death in the power of the tongue.
Yes. Yep.
And so I'm learning about how I talk and things I say and these agreements that I've made, and just, speaking promises over my life versus lies and just
Right.
negativity. Right. And so I was learning that, and I was learning just like taking God out of the box, dealing with my religious junk, that I had dealt with some of it, but not near to the extent that I was that I was going through now.
Right.
So God put that in my life at the beginning of this journey, because he knew I would need it. He
Yeah.
knew I would need it. And I'm so, so, so thankful for that. And I still go to those retreats. We're going to have one this month, where I'm actually getting to be helping and lead it, and being a part of it, and sharing testimonies. And there's just, there's so much redemption, so much restoration, so much healing
Yeah.
on this journey.
That power of inner healing, and that's something else we don't. That could be a whole nother things that we could talk about, because that's something that's not talked about enough either, or at least it wasn't in my circles. I'd never heard
Right.
of it,
Me either. Me
but
either.
I've gone through. God, you know, led me to a place because I needed that. And
Yeah.
I can read, so we relate to that. It's like, yes, that breakthrough. And you just want everybody to have that
Yeah.
and to know that, because it's, yeah. So I won't get off on that tangent, but I fully get that. But yes, inner healing is so important and it's so freeing.
So freeing. I mean, I have so many pictures that Jesus gave me along the way of how he was right there with me. He was right there with Scotty. I have so many words and scriptures and just things that he gave me, so many journals full of all of this stuff. And just, there's one picture that I always remember, and I will never forget. And it's when I was really struggling with letting go of control, because when you love someone who is an addict, there's so much fear. There's so much unknown. And for me, I was scared he was going to go back to prison because he was on parole. And what if he goes back to prison and never gets out? My life's changed forever. What if
Right.
he dies? What if he hurt? Like, there's so many things. Like, me letting go of control meant a lot of things. It was risky, and it was really me deciding if I was going to trust God or not. Like, such a deep level of surrender that I have never known before. And God gave me a picture of Scotty. He was like a little toddler boy running around everywhere, and he was just going all over the place, right? And Jesus was on his tail everywhere he went. Like, he
Oh,
didn't miss a beat. Scotty was never alone. And I will never forget that picture, because
oh,
it was like, okay, God, all the times that he was out there on his motorcycle and I didn't know if he was going to make it home, angels were around him and you brought him home. Like, there's
mm,
just so many stories of God's protection and how he was with him during that time. And so, um, what brought this all to where we finally started to heal was the summer of 2022. So 2 years ago, June of 2022, it had gotten to a point where I had actually kicked him out of the house. We were living as roommates. There was no connection. He was just out there. I was trying to figure out, how do I live in this? How do I set boundaries? I don't know. But I had had enough. And so I kicked him out of the house. And a week later, he got arrested. And this is how amazing God is. God, Scotty's been in a lot of prisons. He's done a lot of time in his life. He knows prison life, jail life, and he knows how awful they are. He's experienced trauma in prison, you know. Well, he was halfway between San Antonio and Houston, in this little town. This is where he gets arrested. He gets pulled over close to this little town called LaGrange, Texas. Like, imagine Mayberry. Like,
okay.
Andy Griffith and Barney Fife are the sheriffs there, right?
Okay.
Um, and it's got the little town square and the little pretty courthouse, right? And San Antonio is big, and like, if he would have got arrested here, like, it would have been so awful, and the county jail is awful. And so he gets arrested there, and he goes to the jail. And of course, I am communicating with him, and I go see him about a week later, because he was detoxing and coming off so many different things. And I show up, and I had been into a lot of prisons myself, so I knew what it was like. I show up, and the little sheriff guy is like, "Well, hello there, ma'am. How are you doing?" It was a Sunday, right? I'm like, "Well, hi." I walk in, and I ask him, I'm like, "I'm assuming he needs my license, right? My ID." He's like, "No, don't worry about it. You just go sign in over there." And when I signed in with a pencil at this little jail. Okay. Like, I'm used to being like the metal detector machine on me. Like, they're patting you down. You can't take
Right.
anything in a prison. Like, they're making, no, I could call that jail, and I could ask, I could ask about Scotty and ask if he was doing okay. And they would know him by name. They would go tell him, "Hey, go call your wife because she's worried about you." I'm like, how does that happen? Right? The mercy and grace of God.
Mm,
And even the food, he told me the food in this jail was the best food he had ever had in his whole life in prison, because it's like, literally, Aunt B is in the kitchen cooking all the food for, like, he said there's this little old lady in the kitchen, and that's who's making all the food. And I remember telling him, "Do you see how much God loves you?" Like, he is chasing you down. He
mm,
arrests you. And I knew on that day that God was saving his life. I knew it. I knew it was a God thing. I knew that it was going to be the beginning of a change. And it was. And that was, he sobered up. He was resurrendering to God, and he was getting back into alignment with the truth that he knew about God, And isn't it just like God to bring him back to the same place where he met him, right? He met him in prison. He's back in a jail cell,
right.
and he's on his knees before God again. And this time it's different, of course. There's more history, more junk now with God,
Right.
and he's got to deal with all the shame and the guilt and the trauma. But during that, he was in jail a year. So during that year, um, it really allowed me to calm down. Like I wasn't living in this constant anxiety feeling of what's
Sure.
going to happen today because I knew he was safe.
Yeah. You knew where he was, and
I
yeah.
knew he was alive. Um, and so we were able to begin talking again. And he started taking responsibility for the things he had done. He started we started reconciling. He started asking for forgiveness, and I knew it was different because he was sober and he was meaning it. It wasn't just words, you know. Of
Right.
course, he was going to have to come out and there was going to have to be more to this healing plan of actions that go
Right.
with his words. But
Right.
it was a start. And God took care of me that year. I had to jump in and just start running our construction business, which was a whole nother crazy story. But um, God took care of me so well. And that was such a good thing for Scotty to see because he always felt like he was the source and he had to make sure he provided everything. And of course, you know, men are made to provide. And yes, he was going to work, but yet it was something that really drove him. Right. And he believed so many lies around that.
Right.
And so him watching God take care of me that year was like just what he needed to
Yeah.
see that God would show up for me and even and for him too. And so, excuse me, he came home July 14th of 2023. So about a year later. He's been home a little over a year. He's been sober a year. Um, and we are we're still in the healing journey. We're still God's still restoring us. God is still redeeming our story.
Right.
And we have help. You know, we have counselors that we meet with once a month that are amazing, that we love, who have been through so much with us and have stuck it out with us. We go to a recovery group together once a week, where we love those people. And it's a recovery group that is for both the family member and the addict, so you get to sit in the room together and you get to hear each other's perspectives, and it builds
Okay.
compassion and empathy. And so we do that together. um, and you know, God had to show me. I had this picture of what healing looked like. I thought it looked like perfection. Really, is what it was. I thought that
Gotcha.
if me and Scotty were healed, then that meant he's sober, he's connected to God, we're moving forward, everything's great. Like we're really over the past and like everything's good. That was kind of what I had in my mind. And God showed me, no, that's not what healing is. That healing is not perfect. It's a process, it's a journey. And so God started showing me how healing is every day we're showing up and we're staying in it. Even when it gets hard, we're not leaving, we're committed, we're getting help, we're working on ourselves, we're working on our marriage, and we're not running away, you know? And every time we do that over and over and over again, more healing comes, more
Right.
healing comes.
Right.
Um, this past weekend, we got to go to a love after marriage retreat. And it was another full circle moment because we went to this retreat in 2018, a few months after everything blew up in my world, in our world. And um, that's where we met Jenny and Phil, our counselors and our friends. They were the leaders of that marriage retreat there. And we did get some healing there. It was awesome and amazing, but it wasn't for Scotty. It was, he just wasn't ready for it, right? He wasn't at that place. And so getting to go back, it was in the same little town about an hour from San Antonio at the same church with Jenny and Phil again. They're the leaders, and we get to take our whole life group with us to this marriage retreat this time. And we're all there together and we're going through it again. I'm like, wow, God, we we both walked away from there feeling just so much more restoration. You know, we could actually listen to each other this time. We were able to even forgive at a deeper level. We were able to reconcile some things and let go of some things. And it was just so beautiful. And so I'm so thankful that we got to do that. And I'm just so thankful for where we're at right now. Just it feels we have so much hope. And I had hope all along. I really did. Jesus was my hope. He was. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God did not bring us through everything we went through. He did not bring Scotty out of prison after serving almost 16 years to just that this was going to be the way it ended. And I would tell God that, like, God, this is not how this story is going to end. I'm not going to believe that. I am going to hold on to hope. I'm going to hold on to your promises. You're going to do something. And he did. He did every step of the way. Every step of the way he did it.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
What an amazing story.
Mm,
And I hate to even say story because this is your life. This is real life and stuff. But yeah, I'm just thinking about all the places I'm seeing God in there and how
yeah.
he's protecting, how he's leading, how he's working in that. And and how you didn't turn away from God.
Yeah.
And even how Scotty didn't turn away. He was still, yes, he was going through stuff, but at the same
Right.
time he didn't, neither of you shut your lives off to God.
Right. Right.
And I think keeping that open, obviously played a big part, because if he wasn't open to what God was doing, then it could be a lot different and everything and stuff. So,
Yes.
and now you help other women, I think, right, with
Yes.
who's
Yes.
going through these things and stuff.
Yes,
But
you do.
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's painful, but at the same time, it's beautiful. And I think that's one of the things that I want, and I say I want this Still Standing series to do. I think it's what God wants. Because
Yeah.
one of the things in the Bible we see the good, bad, and the ugly.
Hmm.
And but when I was going through my personal stuff, I did what I called suffered in silence, because I wasn't hearing anybody else's story. I was hearing the good,
Right.
but I never heard that there were the struggles, and I never saw the bad. And so it was like, I'm all alone. I can't share this
Right.
because nobody's going to understand. And, what are they going to do? They're going to take off, or, judge, or
Right.
whatever. And so, I think that this is one thing that, God wants us to know. People need to know you're never alone, and you're never the only one going through something.
Right.
We all have stuff. We either still
Yes.
have it, we have had it, but we're walking through it, and that God never leaves us. And I just love that picture that you shared, showing where God was right there with Scotty all that time. I mean, and if we could just really get that in, that even through all the stuff, God is there wooing us and drawing us back to him.
Yes.
So,
Amen. Amen to
ooh, this,
that.
this is wonderful. I will ask you two questions if I could. One,
Yes.
I'm going to ask you, through all of this, through everything, I like to ask people, is there a life verse?
Hmm.
Something that it's like, yes, there's certain verses through different times. I know that, we lean to, but is there that one lifeline, or that one verse that you kind of have been your
Hmm.
theme throughout your go-to throughout your whole life?
Yes. Well, the verse that I feel like has become my life verse, I don't know if it was my whole life, but definitely I feel like it is now. It's Psalms 126, 5 and 6, and I'll read it. This is in the Passion Translation. It says, those who sow their tears as seeds will reap a harvest with joyful shouts of glee. They may weep as they go out carrying their seed to sow, but they will return with joyful laughter and shouting with gladness as they bring back armloads of blessings and a harvest overflowing.
Oh,
So I love that verse because it
wow.
just reminds me, God reminds me that every tear that I have cried throughout my life is a seed, and it's planted in the ground, and there will be a harvest. There
Mm,
will be a harvest for every seed. And I already am seeing harvest in so many things. And I was seeing harvest all along the journey, right?
right.
Um, but I know, and I know more is coming too, because God's good for it. he's good for it.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
And then, knowing what you know now,
Yeah.
what would you say to that person that is going through something now? It could be something very similar, but it's through a trial. So,
Yeah.
what would you say to that person from your standpoint?
Yeah. I would say get help way quicker than I did. Um, Lean into the things that God wants to show you about you. And because I was so focused on rescuing Scotty, and there was so much fear around it. And it took me a while to get to that place where I was like, okay, God, I know you have things for me. I know that there's healing for me. Let's dive in, let's do this together. And so yeah, I would encourage people to um dive in with Jesus, and just start asking him what he wants to show you about you, and for him to put people in your life that can help you navigate that journey, because nobody can do it alone. You
Right.
cannot do this alone, no matter what your story is, even if it's one person. And I did have to learn that. I learned that I don't have to include everybody in the journey, because that was too much. I didn't want to keep up with having to tell all the details of the story to the people that were reaching out to me saying, "Hey, how's it going?" And I know they cared, but God showed me to really dwindle down the amount of people that I was keeping close and that were really involved in the day to day. Two or three people that really walked through everything with me and that knew what was going on. And God will show you who those people are. You don't need everybody, but you do need somebody, even if it's just one person.
Right. Right. Yes, that's so true. And then, and now, how do people get in touch with you if this resonated with them and they're like, I need that's somebody I want to talk to or I need to talk to? How do they get in touch with you?
I have a website, jennifershook.com, and I you can contact me through there. I have my social media linked on there, and so yeah, I would love to connect with anybody that wants to just chat some more or pray or any of that. I would love to.
Right. Okay. That sounds good. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here. Thank you for being so willing and open to share that journey. And I know that this will touch lives, and I don't know what all God will do with it and when, but it will definitely touch lives for sure. And I'm so thankful for having you here.
Thank you for having me, Violet.
You're so welcome. And I just want to say that to the ones that's listening here, that I want to remind you that of the scripture in Isaiah 43:2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow you.
Mhm.
When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you. He's there for us, and he's there specifically for you. And I want you to know that. And if this has touched you or resonated with you, I would invite you and ask you to, like, share, subscribe, comment. I believe this is one way that we can share God's word and get his word out there. And so by doing that, I think you are helping to fulfill that great commission for us to go into all the world, because people need to know that God is real and that he cares.